Today's guest is a senior leader of one of the world's largest fitness chains. A giant in its own right, the business has also nurtured countless fit pros that have branched out to build big name brands around the world through their experience. With over 3 decades of management experience, there's little that our guest hasn't had to overcome. Now he brings this insight to a company with over 4 million members in over 400 clubs across the USA, continuing to grow and educate all under his wing. Please welcome the president of 24 Hour Fitness, Frank Napolitano, to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Welcome, Frank.
Good to be here.
And thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
So I've been told to ask you about a story to do with a boulder. Does that ring a bell? Or?
Yes, sure. Many years ago, as part of our industry group, I joined a roundtable and met so many great people on that roundtable, and they've been instrumental in my life. They've gone on to do some amazing things. And the leader of that at the time was a gentleman named Will Phillips, and he was a disciple of a particular brand of consulting, and part of which included the reality that people have 4 basic management styles, and they tend to go to their dominant management style in times of crisis or trouble. So while we may be flexible when things are going well, sometimes when things are going poorly, we get a little bit more rigid, and we tend to go back and default to our dominant style. And among those styles were producers, people who just go do things, entrepreneurs who tend to think of creative ways of solving problems, integrators, people who understand the role of all the different styles in getting things done, and then there are the people you would commonly refer to as administrators, who tend to be more the accounting types. You can suss out who a person is by asking them questions that they don't really understand why you're asking, and one of my favorite ones is around encountering a rock in the road and what's your way of dealing with it. So in most of the interviews I've ever done, I've either used the rock in the road or a variety of other proxies for a question that would get you to the answer of who are you really? Don't tell me who you are. Demonstrate it by solving the problem that I give you in a way that demonstrates you're that.
Right. Okay. So which one of those are you then, Frank?
Well, all of us have some element of all 4. We're just dominant in one or the other. Mine are E and I, entrepreneur and integrator. Integrators tend to be the leaders of large organizations. People tend to think entrepreneurs are the great leaders of organizations. In reality, they can be as much distracting to an organization as they are beneficial. Whereas integrators, who understand the value of each role and tend to bring people together in cohesive teams, get stuff done. Yeah. So I'm a little bit of both. Right. I'm a little bit of a troublemaker and a little bit of an integrator.
Yeah. I guess that must be quite rare then to have both, would you say?
No? I think it's not uncommon for people to have both of those. In many cases you have the very least of one, and it doesn't show up much, but most of us have at least 3 that we demonstrate quite a lot of.
Right.
For me, A is hardly noticeable.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And what would you then? How would you get the rock out of the road if you're a bit of both? I'm just curious. Yeah. Well, my default answer to that is always, do I really need to go this way, or is there a better way? Which is the entrepreneur in me. But then, if not, how does the team do we work together to get to our destination? The rock is invariably an impediment that isn't really the impediment. There's a goal in mind, and I love it when people ask me, well, what was our goal? Where are we going? Why are we going there? Because there's possibly a better way to get this done than just doing that. Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess there's probably similarities between like the origins of this company, 24 Hour Fitness, where I guess, would you say that was probably started by more of an entrepreneurial type of character?
Yes, but really I've never seen Mark Masteroff take the test, but I'm going to presume he was a PE producer, hard charging, go get it done kind of guy. Yeah. But Ray Wilson really started the southern part of this empire, and right. He has had his own unique qualities as well.
Yeah. Do you think that companies, as they go through different stages of their evolution, that that it requires a different type of leadership?
Absolutely. Young entrepreneurial companies, startups tend to only be P&E. The I role tends to come a great deal later when people understand that they can't do it all on their own. And the A usually happens when they think they're doing really well, except they have no money in the bank. So yeah, and over time, companies develop a more balanced profile, and if they don't, they tend not to succeed because they're missing a key element of how you run a business successfully.
And how many years has 24-Hour Fitness been going now?
I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe this is the 39th year.
Right.
Of course, I've only been in it 4.5, so I've memorized all the history, but it's certainly been around a very long time.
Yeah. And do you think that even with mature companies, do you think they get to a stage where they need a bit of that entrepreneurial kind of, let's kind of recreate again because maybe they're getting a bit, stuck in their ways? Do you think that?
I not only think it, I know it. I mean, there are corporate life cycles, which is actually the name of the book,
really?
Where so a little bit like an economics demand curve, the company is the sum of the behaviors or predilections of all of its leaders. So you can look at the leaders' profiles, you can sum them up and understand what the company's profile is. What tends to happen in most companies is they get on a good run, they have pretty rapid growth, it's called the go-go phase. Then they reach adolescence and they're really starting to get it, right? They're maturing, and then they reach maturity. And in maturity you make a lot of money, but you also start to lose some of the entrepreneurial zeal that got you there in the first place. And so there's invariably this regeneration. Sometimes it's called the founder's trap. 20 years in, maybe you are in it. I doubt it though. But people get that way. The founder tends to have done things one way and understand that, and the market shifts or moves, or just the reality is it needs a new infusion of energy that comes from either leadership change or leadership additions. And so what you then have is a dip and a restart of the growth cycle, so that corporate life cycles look like S-curves, and if you're lucky, continuing to go up, and if you're not, bending down.
Right. So as an individual then, do you, if you want, I guess, and you've been through many large successful companies, do you as an individual leader have to reinvent yourself with those curves if you want to be with a company, or is it a case of you need to work with the company and say, right, now it's time for me to switch and do something else? How do you manage those?
That's a great question. But being a natural entrepreneur, I'm always looking for ways to do things differently or better. So I think it's a little bit easier if you have some E in you. Some of the greatest leaders ever have been AIs, people who just are structured and thoughtful in their leadership role. And the larger the company gets, the more important those two things are. I've never been in General Electric, so I wouldn't know what that was like. But in our kind of company, entrepreneurial people tend to look for new and better ways to accomplish things, and it tends to cause you to re-energize or remake yourself in a different way over time. And I do think that's important. I think it's critical, actually.
Yeah. Do you think the fitness industry is the same as other industries, or do you think the fact that it is quite trend-based, that there's a need to be more innovative and entrepreneurial?
What it is it's young. May will be my 35th year in the industry, but when I look back at what the industry looked like 35 years ago, it was quintessentially mom and pop. It was tiny. So we've had 35 years of growth. There are even tech companies much older than that. I mean, IBM or Ingersoll Rand, been around. I mean, not Ingersoll Rand. Sperry Univac have been around very much longer than that. So we're just a very young industry, and I think what that has the consequence of that is we think of things as faddish, as in some of the greatest innovations come from startups, small companies, people who've got a better idea and a better way to do it. So it feels that way. The reality, I think, is that we are a pretty innovative industry just in general. A lot has changed in those 35 years in the way we do stuff, and it's materially different than it was back then in ways that you couldn't ascribe to a airline or or a car company. They've made modest changes around the edges. I think we've really had some fairly profound changes, some of which have been brought forward by larger companies, but the majority of it are coming just from the fact that it's such an immature industry that everybody thinks they can get it done and do it better, and I think it's been an incredibly valuable asset for us as a whole.
Right. What would you say from your perspective are some of those big changes that you've seen over the 35 years?
Well, if you think back to 1986 or 87, largely pre-personal trainers. There were probably some personal trainers someplace. But as a rule, the industry didn't rely on personal trainers. The industry relied on fitness professionals who helped people for free. I think that's meaningfully different than saying I not charge you for your bag, where there's really no delta in what you're getting. You're just paying for something you didn't get before. I think the advent of personal training taught us that people really do need help and want help to get to their fitness goals, and so personal training was born. In the meantime, we left behind the majority of people who don't take personal training or can't afford it, and not giving them the help that they needed to get there. So has come more recent generations of gym operators putting together like wonderful tools to help people become successful, even if all they can afford is the phone in their hand. Right.
So with the industry, I guess it's getting people to do something that they don't generally like, in most cases, to do. It's not like going to a bar and having a drink. Certainly not to me, and I've been doing it for a long time. What do you think us as an industry it's really about? What is our job? Is it to provide great spaces for people to come and do what they should do? Is it to, as you say, be able to help them more to get what they want? What would you describe our role as the industry?
Well, I think it very much depends on your perspective. I always say I do not live to exercise, I exercise to live. And I think I describe the majority of the population of the world. I think people are accustomed to being paid for working, not paying to work. And that's what you do in the gym business. So it's always been a sort of an upside down industry in that way. And therefore, the moment you get an opportunity to not do it or have a good reason not to do it, you stop. And not everyone. There are people who live to exercise. And they would never give it up for anything. As previously mentioned, I am not one of them. So I think I do look at it from a different perspective, in the perspective of our average customer. And I think what they want, what they need is enough tools and enough variety to be able to pivot when something has gotten in their way. And historically, we didn't have very good ways of doing that. If you couldn't get to the gym or you couldn't afford your gym membership, you were pretty well not going to be exercising unless you were going to be running outside or doing something that was relatively free. But largely, if you lost your motivation to come to the gym, you probably didn't suddenly sprout a new motivation to run. Which is why the vast majority of people who have gym memberships also have exercise equipment at home. They've tried that, didn't work. Now they have a wonderful clothes hanger sitting in their somewhere in their home, if they haven't tried to sell it on Craigslist and essentially given it away. So I think giving people enough options across the range of things that happen in their life and resources that they have available to make it happen is really what they're expecting from us as an industry. Any given club organization or exercise organization could have its own philosophy on that. If I'm a yoga studio, then I think everybody needs yoga. As the old saying goes, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But even people who love yoga fall in and out of love. And the question is then, what do they do? One of the reasons this business, the 24-hour fitness business, is so appealing to me to come back and do my final rodeo, as it were, is that I think a set of facilities, an organization which is can offer people that broad a set of options really is well positioned to help people stay on with what they set out to do in the first place, which is get whatever results they were seeking. So I think that's a big piece of it, but I don't think it's just providing a place to exercise. Were that the case, it becomes commoditized and everybody can buy the same equipment. There's no magic in that. So people, I think, are the difference, and technology. I think one big difference today is the ability to supplement exercise programs with technology, but also when necessary to hunker down around just a technological solution while you either don't have the time, motivation, or money to be exercising in a boutique or a gym. So I think it's providing people with ways to exercise that are broad enough and flexible enough to keep them engaged over the long haul, because we need to be kept engaged. We don't naturally engage ourselves.
No. So just jumping back a moment then, for listeners' benefits, what was it like and where did you come in to the industry?
So I am not your prototypical industry rat. I started in public accounting with Arthur Andersen many years ago. Became a lawyer and practiced with a firm called Morgan Lewis for years. And then I became a real estate developer and quite by accident ended up with a gym. And like so many people who sort of wandered into it either for love of tennis or racquetball, or back then that was it, because there was no love of fitness or very little. I just figured, how hard could this be?
And was that TSI where you first?
Oh, no. This was back in 1984. And then that worked out quite well.
Who was that?
From a real estate, it was just one gym,
right, okay.
on a parcel that I wanted to own. And so that actually became quite a lucrative business for us, taking larger facilities that had been tennis facilities that were no longer profitable, frequently located on large tracts of land, and agreeing to take the problem away if we got the land as well. And worked out well. And I did that for many years. Also developed a chain of hotels around the same time with that same partner. And so I came to it quite in quite an odd way.
Right.
But what you find, that was while I got involved in 1984 and certainly did learn a lot about the industry and get involved in IRSA and find out what I didn't know, which was everything. I really didn't get deeply involved until the late 80s. We had sold off all the other clubs and the hotels, and I was always a deal guy, and I thought I should really learn how to do this, see if I can run something. And so I settled in just running one location, and probably 1996 or so. And that's when I fell in love with the industry. You realize, I'm the president of 24 Hour Fitness, but when people ask me, I always say that the most important people, the only people who matter, are the 440 general managers we have. I've had a lot of interesting roles in my life, but the best job I ever had was as a general manager of my own club, because you get to do good and do well. You get to help people. You get to meet people every day. There were problems, of course, but overall, it was the most engaging experience of my life. And so that's how I got involved. And I never quit. I eventually sold that gym to Town Sports International, New York Sports Clubs, in 2000, January 1st of 2000, and started working to help grow that company.
Right. And what did you think, coming from a lawyer, was it a big sort of decision that you made from coming from, I suppose, what you'd been used to going into a very different type of world?
Yeah, I didn't choose to do it. It just happened. I just had the gym and had to do something with it. But the legal background is what I used to ensure that we had the opportunities to buy the assets and then to operate them. So it was a deal for me.
Right.
But then, as I said, in 1996, I had to settle. I didn't have to. I chose to settle in and see if I could actually operate something.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with it. It's been
right. And when you was at TSI, what was the market back then? Was that when that particular part of the industry was booming? Was
yeah,
it?
Yeah. Well, Dickens was half right. It was the best of times, not the worst of times. Of course, we experienced, because we were New York based, we experienced September 11th, 2001, which was decidedly the worst of times. But for the fitness industry, it was just a wonderful moment in time. It was a growth period. There were opportunities everywhere. There were no low-cost providers. Boutique meant you were getting your hair done or your nails done someplace. It was just a wonderful growth moment for the industry, both for 24-Hour Fitness and for New York sports clubs, Town Sports International, and LA Fitness, and really all of the bigger players. It was our moment in the sun.
Right. And what do you think, sort of having a different perspective now, almost looking at that as a moment in time from where it sort of started to where things changed? What would you have done if you, I suppose now looking at those businesses, and having the benefit of being able to kind of predict what was happening? What do you think you would do to engineer the business for change? I suppose, put it another way, did you see that sort of, I guess, expansion and contraction happening at the time, and what would you do to sort of, and again looking back on it, what would you do to sort of prepare the business to thrive through, I guess, the ups and downs?
Outstanding question. Actually, no one's ever asked me that question. I know. My experience is anyone who tells me they're a visionary isn't. So I think most people who've looked around corners have really done so by accident. What was true, though, is there were edges of change and there were shadows on the wall of future state that you could see. Well, you take David Barton in New York at the time, essentially offering free memberships if you took personal training. I mean, call it what you will. It was the first boutique, right? It was the you take classes rather than pay a membership fee,
right.
And as amazing as it sounded at the time, there were inklings of what could be. I think early on, everybody thinks of Planet Fitness as the 7-year wonder. It's really the 24-year wonder or whatever it is.
Right.
It was kicking around the whole time. You could look at it, if you didn't get offended or scratch your head or jump up and down and say they can't possibly make money, you realized that there was going to be this disaggregation of the market where you would unbundle the various things that people wanted, and that would have led you to probably a more layered approach, even in a large gym setting. But those kinds of changes are very hard to make once you're a company of any size.
Right.
So you ask yourself, is that kind of change worth it? Will I get enough value for trying to make that change versus just being the best at what I'm already good at? What's interesting to me, and you could predict that I'd say this, is 4.5 years ago we didn't have to buy 24-Hour Fitness. We thought it was a great opportunity, and we thought that knowing what we knew about boutiques and about low-cost operators, because really, in a way, we're a back to the future kind of space, right? To my point earlier, the flexibility to take different paths toward exercise, whether that's Group X now because I'm lonely and I need a friend because my relationship just ended, or strength training because I have a desire to do a Spartan race, or weight loss because I just got divorced and I'm never going to find another wife if I don't lose some weight. I mean, whatever those needs are that life puts in front of you, a broad-based facility can solve that problem for you and can do it most cost effectively. So it's interesting how you would have, if you were prescient, which I was not, and could look forward, you very well might do exactly what was done, which is stay the course, because all things come in cycles, and people will make money in the boutiques, and they'll make money in the low-cost space. But the one segment of the industry that has always made money is the middle.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think you're right, because I guess it's when you are, you've got 100 plus clubs, it's, I guess the cost to making those changes and from the people, the processes, the locations is probably more than a business could handle, I guess, in most cases.
If it's physical plant changes, almost always. There's no good return on the capital spent. But when you think about transforming your business, I think the biggest mistake this industry made from the very beginning is we were not customer-centric enough. We sold the kinds of things we wanted to sell. And if that happened to work for a customer, great. We told them they had to exercise 3 times a week, even though deep down in our souls we knew that the average number of uses per week across every type of club, across continents, and across time is 1.1 or 1.2. So we set people up for failure everywhere, but told them what we thought was right. I think having the courage to change to become more customer-centric is something that you can do across 440 locations, and it's something that we're fully committed to. And I just think you're going to see a fundamental shift that way, and that will not leave room for some of the businesses that have cropped up. Once you make it a customer-centric, once you make a choice to be a customer-centric business, you really change the dynamic for everybody. And I think you're going to see that being the major shift that happens in the coming years. And by that I don't mean working with third-party aggregators or others who would say that they're making it easier for people to exercise. I mean you actually getting customers what they want in the way they want it, not the way it's most convenient for you.
Right. So what interested you about coming and heading up this company that you obviously had a huge success in the early days when the industry was thriving, and then I guess when you came in, what was it, 4 years ago? Was it 4 years ago?
4.5. It'll be 5 in May.
You probably came in at an extremely tough time in what the things that were going on in the industry. You had the low cost, which was growing. You have the boutiques that are coming in. What was appealing about that, and what did you think you were able to do to kind of grow the business from where it was?
Yep. People tend to write the epitaphs of great businesses for no reason other than the shiny object is over here or there.
Yeah.
And I think we were able to look beyond that and see the reality of what a great mid-tier player could do. There was incredibly rapid growth of the low-cost and boutiques in the period between the time when we bought it and today. We've seen that modulate, which is great news. But they never stopped us from growing. We'll open 18 locations this year. We'll open another 25 next year. And that never changed the profile of a new club for us. That continues to perform extremely well when we open them. So we've always felt there's a place in the market for all of these. People ask me that question as if I were taking on the resurrection of Jeep or Chrysler or somebody. Oh my God, there's no way. But Chrysler was losing tens of millions of dollars a day, and this company never lost a nickel in its life. So it's a great business in a great industry, and I think particularly well positioned to give people the options that they need to stay with their program just a little bit longer.
Right. And when you come in, I guess as you've been an entrepreneur, businessman for many years, what are the things when you come into a business how do you start? I guess you must have done some work obviously before you came in, but what are the areas that if you call it the 80-20 or whatever you call it, what are those areas that you think, right, I need to start looking at these things first, or do you just look at the whole thing and try and put it in? What's that process like?
So there's a a wonderful myth of leadership, I think, that people come in and they have an idea and they go get it done. And I just don't think that's the way leadership works. What we did was we spoke to many of the great people who had been in this industry for a long time and in this business for a long time and said, you know, what do you think we should do? We're still building clubs that are ramping at heretical rates. I mean, it's just, people obviously love what we do. What can we do to transform a good, solid, growing company into something that's extraordinary? And I think while it takes time to accomplish that, you have to get your systems, infrastructure in place. You have to get your people in place. You have to get your culture shifted. You have to do many things, and that doesn't happen in a day or a week or a month. And you know, notwithstanding the stories that people will tell you about, oh, he turned that company around in a year, it just doesn't work like that, especially not a company of the size of 24 Hour Fitness. So you learn a lot, you ask a lot of questions, you set out a strategy that you think is transformational, and then you go after it. We spent quite a bit of time building the infrastructure to allow us to do that. The bad news is it was a company that had built most of its infrastructure long enough ago that it was not what you would call modern. The good news about that is it has allowed us to leapfrog the infrastructure of others who had newer infrastructure than us when we bought it. So I often say, you know, why is the cell phone service better in Costa Rica than it is in Costa Mesa? It's because they don't have any copper at all. They never had it, so they just leapfrogged to a better technology. And I think that's a huge advantage, and that's something we're just now poised to take full advantage of.
Right. Okay.
So it's a process. You have to build the bones. You have to build the structures. You have to change the culture. You have to pick a strategy that's transformational, and then you have to go execute it.
Right.
And that's where we are today.
So when you come in then, are you saying then that you didn't have any you didn't come with any ideas whatsoever, it was just a case of the research first and then identifying kind of where you need to focus on, would you say?
Yeah, so sometimes I'm asked to talk to our new district managers and regional vice presidents and just have a conversation about life and, you know, how to be successful. And yesterday I had one of those, and one of them asked me, so, you know, what's the most important quality, you know, you can have as a leader? And I said, just never be sure you're right, because if you're sure you're right, there's no room for arguing with you, and you're going to take the path of one person's view or dream. And the reality is it's possible that it's correct, but it's not likely. And I always reminded of Steve Jobs, who gets all the credit in the world for everything that ever happened, but not every idea was Steve Jobs' idea. His job was to know which were the great ones, right, and understand how to take that opportunity and make it better. And so I think it just takes a lot of people. So yeah, we had some ideas of things we knew we had to do: rebuild the infrastructure, make sure that the teams were properly culturally focused on being customer-centric, and there were some old estate that needed to be rationalized, and we knew we needed to restart building. I mean, there were things that we knew because they were perforce obvious, but in terms of what makes you transformationally different as opposed to just chugging along, no, we spent a lot of time working on that, and I'm glad we did.
Yeah. Would you say, as a business and a leader, there's any principles that you've found have always applied to the different businesses that you've worked in and been involved in?
Sure. The most important one, and again, I think I mentioned it earlier, the most important one is knowing who your constituency is. When you're a general manager in a gym, you have two. You have your employees and you have your customers. But your customers are, by definition, the most important. The reality is, to get them what they need, you need to work through people who share a common goal with you, or a common mindset. As you move up and you don't facing customers any longer, then you need to remember that the people who are facing the customers are the most important. I think the one that has always stuck with me is remember that the higher up you get, the fewer people you're serving, but the more important your service to them is, and you don't do anything. It's not, you're no longer actually creating success, you're just creating an environment for success, and helping other people succeed.
And when you say that you don't do anything, so obviously you are doing anything. So what is that? Not anything. Is that listening? Is that kind of what?
Oh, for sure. There's you don't learn anything when you're talking. Old saw, but true. So yeah, it's listening, it's understanding, it's synthesizing, it's that integrator function that I talked about, understanding how all the pieces come together and how each person adds a different dimension to that conversation. And I think that's the most important. Then it's getting people to work together toward the goal. They're higher order things to do in that they're more complicated and they require less, curiously enough, that you have less and less ego as you do it, because you're letting other people shine, and you're just making it possible for them to succeed. But it's doing something, but it's not doing the things that people think of as success. It's not writing the strategic plan. It's enabling its creation.
Yeah. So I guess you also get 24 hours in a day, like everyone. Same amount. You don't get a special extra day. No. It's
just a matter of how much you're willing to sleep. Is all.
Yeah, because it always. I've got my business, and it's a pretty decent size, but nothing in comparison to this. And I have big lists of things to focus on. There seems to be so many moving parts. With the amount of people and locations, how do you organize your thinking and where to focus and what to do? What's your, is that something you just learnt yourself, or was there a system that you followed? What's your secret in terms of planning, prioritization, and focus?
If it has to be about you, if you have to be everywhere, carrying the flag or cutting the ribbon, there's not enough time to do these things. But once you take a step back and realize your job is to empower other people to be successful, it's not as hard as it sounds. I mean, it's still enormously time consuming, to be sure, but if you have good people, you develop a group of people who you trust and who are like-minded and work hard, and yeah, that's how you do it. You check in with them and make sure things are going well. And you don't have to do it all yourself.
Right. Do you have any time in the week where you do sort of, or prioritize, or step back and think about what you're doing? Or?
Oh, yeah. Sure. I try to meditate every morning, because it's if I don't exercise by 10 o'clock in the morning, I will not get exercise in that day. And if I start out with meditation, it makes exercise a lot easier for me.
Really?
But it takes me out of the I've got to go do stuff mode and into the give yourself a little time mode, and then you move toward exercise. For me, anyway, that's been an important element, and that's, I think I'm probably offending every yogi in the world by saying this, but for me, meditation doesn't end up being a complete blankness of mind. It's just a calming of mind. And during those periods of time, the one nugget or two that'll slip through is usually the thing I really should have been focusing on all along. Then my rule is Monday and Tuesday are the 2 days I focus on the things I don't want to do.
Or you don't want to do?
Right.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we all have preferences, right? Things we prefer, things we don't prefer. I make sure I do all the things I don't prefer on Monday and Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if I wait until Wednesday, they're likely not to get done. So just simple rubrics that work for me. I think we all have them. I think we all went through grade school and learned that there was something that our mom or dad told us we should, a rubric we should use to be successful or to get done those things that needed to get done. And I don't think that changes no matter what level you're at. You have to find the rubric that works for you and stick to it. So for me, those are the clear your mind each morning and do the hard stuff first.
And do you write things down? Do you have to do lists or plans that you work from?
You know, it's funny. Of course, I have some lists, but it's really changed for me over time. There was a time when to-do lists were paramount in my world. I think another byproduct of the changing roles is they become the less important thing. If I'm blessed in any way, I have a pretty good memory, and it's funny. My preference is to sit and listen and not write, and then go back afterwards for myself if I need to follow up and write down then. For some people that's not possible. They need to write it right then, otherwise they're going to lose it. That is not, for me, the truth. So it gives me a big advantage on the listening side. So.
Yeah. Do you think that kind of helps? It's interesting you say that, and I'm one for putting things down, and I've got lots of lists, but when you've said it, it's like, okay, well, the important stuff tends to rise, and if you have that time to think about it, you kind of forget about the incidentals, the insignificant, and then you just think, you haven't got anything else to capture those other bits, and you focus on the important things. Do you think that is a little bit?
And that works fine as long as you do the things you don't want to do on Monday and Tuesday.
Right.
Otherwise, the things you don't want to do get to the bottom of the list, and you're feeling good about yourself getting the things you like done, but you're not really moving the ball forward.
Yeah, so it's that balance. Well, I've heard this about you, but I'd like you to talk about it. The importance of kind of good people around you. Well, tell me your thoughts on that. Not necessarily just people within your own team or business, but other, I guess you can call them mentors or mastermind groups. Tell me a little bit about your views on that, please.
Yeah, that's interesting. So people who are open to that, I think, tend to end up being the most successful people who don't feel the need to do it all themselves. A guy named Benjamin Franklin, who people around the world seem to know, even though he's obviously a quintessentially American figure, is credited with so many things, sort of like Steve Jobs, right? The first fire company, and the first insurance company, and the first library, and the first university. And it's true that he was involved in all of those, but he had a group called the Junta. Junta, yeah. That met once a month and that talked about what the community needed and how they could serve the community, and then together worked to create these institutions. If it was good enough for Benjamin Franklin, it's good enough for me. So when I first got the opportunity to participate in an industry roundtable, I thought that's a great idea. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, is it like the Young Presidents Association?" I say, no, it's not. Young Presidents is all a group of people who do different things, and there's much to be learned in that setting, to be sure. But this was unique because we were all in the same industry and doing the same thing, albeit in different ways, and there was so much more to be learned from that. If you had the courage to realize that you might be giving somebody who might be a competitor your best idea, and that you therefore better have another great idea right behind it, so you would always stay a step ahead. It was awesome, and that group for me was the foundational group that launched the opportunities to grow this industry and to grow our companies quite rapidly.
Right. Is that something that you would, even for people coming in the industry, do you think it's important to see if you could find some form of group or mentor to share with, or is it just a personal thing that worked for you?
Oh, I think it's essential for anybody who aspires to do more, and that isn't necessarily to be the president or CEO of a company. It's just to do more than they're doing today. If you're a poet or a songwriter or an artist of any stripe, I guess maybe you have to brood and do it alone, and other people's influence will slow you down. But if you're the rest of us and you're just trying to do something better, there's no better thing to do than to learn from other people. I'm always impressed when someone shows up in my office and just says, "So, what should I do now?" People have one of two reactions to that. On the asking side, they either think if I go in there and I ask that, they're going to think I'm not competent or I'm stupid. And the other people say, well, I want to know, so I don't care what he thinks or she thinks. I'm always impressed when someone comes in and says that, right? It's sort of such incredible self-awareness to realize that nobody knows everything, and most of us don't even know that much. So how could you not want to talk to people? How could you not want to learn? And then if you have the great good fortune to surround yourself with really, really smart people, it makes it even better. I mean, my roundtable group now.
Do you still do that now in your?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Right.
Sure. My roundtable group now consists of the most successful operators in the world, and they didn't get there by accident. They got there. Sure, they're all smart, and sure they have different paths to it, but they all shared a willingness to share, and a deep-seated understanding of the fact that the way for them to become the best they could be was to surround themselves with other people who are really good.
Right.
And I think that's just essential to success.
Right. And do you have a fixed agenda, or do you just meet up and chat? How organized is the sort of things that you talk about?
So have you ever tried to herd cats?
No, but I can imagine.
So these are all...
I guess they're sort of all very successful, and I guess everybody kind of knows what they want. I suppose it must be.
and it's a great experience for all of us, because in our own environments, we tend to talk and people listen. In this environment, you could be talking, saying the most brilliant thing in the world, and it may or may not be listened to. It's actually, it trains all of us to be better at listening to other people and listening to their points of view, to figuring out what was the nugget in what I heard. So it trains us to become better listeners. But yeah, we have an agenda, of course. We rarely, if ever, stick with the agenda, and I think that's important. I think there are things that come up that you'd not thought of before, therefore you would never have put them on the agenda, and you say, wow, wait a minute, that's really interesting. Let's talk more about that. Let's next time have somebody come in and talk to us about that, because none of us really know how to evaluate that parallel opportunity or whatever. I think, that willingness to say, I know what I don't know is really, really important to success.
And then in those situations, I'm guessing anyway, that you sort of have to work to put your ego a little bit at the door. Is that part of it? I know it's difficult to answer because you're close to these people. No.
We all, look, I'll lead with me. I mean, sure, we all. And you show me a successful person who doesn't have an ego. Go ahead. Name one. No, you have to believe in yourself. You have to have a strong sense of self to be successful in anything you do. So yeah, it's hard to put it, especially when it's obvious that you're wrong. Early on, we used to do club evaluations. Back in the day when we had 4, 5, or 6 clubs, now we all have 4, 5, 600 clubs, and obviously we don't do this much anymore. But we would go through and walk through your facility, and everybody would tell you the things you were doing wrong. I used to call it the $1 million walk, because no matter whose club you went through or what you were talking about, it cost $1 million. But you get to the end of it and think, I don't want to say any of that's right, but when I hear them say it, yeah, that's right. And it was both humiliating and exhilarating all at the same time. And we all learned enormously from that. And occasionally we'll still do it to one of our group. You'll look. Somebody will be complaining about a problem they can't seem to get past, and we'll say, well, next time we're going to have our meeting in your city or that city, and then we'll go and walk through, and it's unrelentingly honest conversation. Yeah, and it can completely change the trajectory of your company, and all for the good.
Yeah.
All for the good.
It sounds very special to be able to have people that, I guess, at that level, that you have that. Obviously, you've got a lot of trust there to be able to, kind of have that type of conversation. But I guess, having a group of people that are all independently successful, and then, looking at something you probably you haven't noticed, it must be extremely valuable. I guess you couldn't put a price on that.
You ignore them at your peril.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's Very interesting. And how did that start? Was that who pulled that together?
Well, it really had its origins with a guy named Jerry Faust, who hasn't done this for a very long time, but Will Phillips was one of his partners, and they ran these roundtables. And so that it began as a facilitated group. And over time, the groups split. There became groups for just general managers, not owners. There became groups for CEOs only. There became groups of small club operations, and then there became groups of large club operations, and that's the one we spun off and have maintained to this day. I think it's 28 years now. 27 years I've been doing it.
Right.
You end up with some great friendships out of that as well, but you end up with a better education than any MBA could possibly give you.
Yeah. So what's your personal ambition now? Where would you mentioned it was your last rodeo. Is this the last one and then that's it? Or you're obviously an ambitious person. You must have thought about that, I guess.
Yeah. People who retire just die. I don't see that happening. And I took golf up way too late in life to be any good at that. So, no, I mean, I will always do something. This kind of undertaking is a 60-hour a week, 50-week a year undertaking, and you reach a point where that's less appealing. But but I think it's, as you grow older, you get more and more opportunities to leverage what you've learned over time. And as long as you're not pontificating about it, but rather asking questions to help people get to their own conclusions, you can add real value. And so I'll find some ways to add value over time. This was just too appealing. This company is just too great a company, and great history. And as I said, never swooned. It's just a matter of how fast it can grow. So it was, when the opportunity came around, it was just one of those things that you let your ego get out there, and you think this would be a cool idea. Let's do this.
So you've seen, I guess you've explained quite well about trends in the industry and with people, and we've talked about, I guess, changes from other companies you've been in. Now with experience and wisdom on your shoulders, what would you, I know it's difficult to predict, but what would you see is likely to happen next? Do you think there's going to be more of the boutiques moving in? Do you think there's just going to be more variety? The low costs are going to change? What would you, if you had to have a guess of some of the things that are likely to happen in the next 5 or so years, what would you predict is likely to happen?
Great question. And I'm inclined to say if I actually knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't share it with you. But since I don't, I'm happy to give you my guess just as well as anybody else's.
Thank you.
Look, I think the boutique industry is in peril. I think they had a unnatural stimulus to growth in the form of ClassPass, in the U.S. anyway. And now that ClassPass has had to retrench from essentially being the marketing engines for these, it's really gotten a great deal tougher for them.
And when you say it's in peril, just struggling to make money, do you think?
Yeah, it's in peril just because most of the operators of boutiques basically have bought themselves a job, and not a very good one in many cases. So it's, to people who love to exercise or who live to exercise, it seems like a cool idea, and it is, and it allows you to exercise your passion while exercising your body. But it's hard to scale. They're hard to scale. They're hard to make a living at. So people tend to go the franchise route, which is interesting. I'm not saying anything good or bad about any particular franchise, but when you look at the industry statistics on those, they're not making much money. Right. And at some point, you sort of look at yourself and say, what am I doing here? I'm teaching classes at 6 in the morning and 7 at night, and I'm not living much of a life, and I'm not making much money. So
why do you think a lot of sort of bigger companies then are going in and investing, and you see different acquisitions and partnerships happening? Why do you think is that? It's just so they don't get left out, or is it just reaction of everybody thinks that's the right thing to do?
I can't speak for other companies. For us, our job, as I see it, is to make us the best mid-tier, large footprint gym in the world. And that's good enough. It's more than good enough. I think it can be transformationally brilliant. And so that's what we're working toward. That's why other people would choose to do that is not entirely clear to me. I do think some gym owners, some large companies are afraid they're missing out on some meteoric path. But the moment a large company runs a boutique, it's not a boutique anymore. There's no chain of boulangeries. It just doesn't work that way. What you're peddling is that unique quality, that individual approach, and how do you replicate that across 1,000 locations? That's not a problem for a franchise like a low-cost operator, where there's no magic in the people. It's magic in the model and the messaging. So I think for the studio operators, it's a tough slog. There always have been studios. There will always be studios. I just think it's hard for that to continue to accelerate. And that's why you see the most recent entrants, whether it's the Mirror or Peloton or others, trying to leverage technology and a one-to-many as opposed to a one-to-one, which is a much harder business model to make work.
Right.
So I do think you're going to continue to see proliferation of those one-to-many models. I think there's always been a place for solo exercise. I think there'll continue to be a place for solo exercise. I said there are a lot more Nordic tracks in the world than there are Pelotons, and there probably always will be. That is not per se a threat to exercise as a group, because group exercise, and I don't mean by that aerobics, I mean just exercise as a group, is a functionality that really it's a function of human nature. We want to be around other people. We want social interaction. Sometimes we just want to be left alone, and so they're both valid exercise modalities. They're just different, right? So nobody's saying that people shouldn't have weight equipment in their basement or an exercise bike or anything else. I think it's great because it gives you more opportunities to stay with the program that you started. But I just don't see it as a replacement for anything. It hasn't been a replacement ever. I don't see it becoming a replacement now. So that's that piece of it, right? The rest of it is what some people like to call the commoditization of fitness. I don't accept that. I think we're creating levels and brands just like the hotel industry did and everybody else did. That's okay too. There are different products for different people at different times in their life. The only thing that would scare me is an overbuilding trend, which people tend to do when they're franchise driven, because there's requirements to put a certain number of units in, and or when they're backed by growth capital, where they may lose sight of how many should be there rather than how many they need to have. So I think those are risks, but I don't see them as meaningful risks. It's funny because people say, well, gee, now the industry's gotten so oversupplied, and it's just not true. It's just not true. It's still a small percentage of the population of the world, America being one of the most densely penetrated from a fitness perspective. There's so many people who still need us. And as the population ages, people like even myself, who's 63, going to be 64 shortly, we grew up exercising. We knew we had to. There's a very small tail of people who didn't ever know that, right? So the pool continues to grow. To me, it's one of the most exciting businesses you could possibly be in. So I don't see. I wish I could tell you I see some magic object dropping in from outer space. I don't think so. There were yoga studios before there were gyms. There were, travel around Italy, you'll go find the palestra with clubs in some of the older ones and kettlebells, and there have been low-cost operators and boutiques forever, and the mid-tier just solved the big problem that people had, and I think it always will.
Yeah.
So I don't see that changing much. I do, as I said, I do think you're going to see a shift to more customer-centric policies and approaches.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing for the industry and just in general.
Yeah. So final question, Frank. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what I guess you've previously believed may have been impossible for yourself, or maybe what other people have said is impossible. What would you say is an example, or a fairly recent example, of you maybe escaping your own personal limits, whether that's sort of personal or in business?
Well, I managed to get through my entire poem I wrote for my daughter at her wedding without crying until the very last line. And for a guy who cries at car commercials, that's I thought a pretty good success.
When did you get married?
She got married 3 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Look,
she's your oldest daughter.
She's my only daughter.
Oh, right. I've got that to come. So.
I'm only sorry that I have only one to marry off, because it was the greatest experience. But look, this whole experience, this is the largest company I've if you don't count a law firm or an accounting firm, this is the largest company I've worked in, and so I had to challenge myself to be even less a doer and more of a influencer than I've ever been. And I think while that's been hard, sometimes it's been very rewarding for me to make that transition in a way that I feel very comfortable with. So I think if you don't keep doing new stuff, it's the analog of you retire, you die. So whatever I do next, I hope it will be something I have not done before, and so I can grow in some way, escape whatever additional limits I have, and just continue to be engaged and excited about it.
Continue to push yourself, I guess, which is probably what got you here. Well, Frank, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. It's been some wonderful lessons there.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.